Whether you're a software engineer or someone making over $100,000 annually, you'll want to listen to this video. On one end of the spectrum, I feel like there's high income earners that did what I did. I was 22, making over $200,000 a year and spending pretty much everything that came in. I had millions worth in equity in my companies and would only continue to increase my salary, so I gave no other thought to investments at all. On the other end of the spectrum, there are engineers who live far below their means. We imagine a bedroom with a mattress on the floor, no nightstand, and no dining table. Those people spend so little in order to invest a big chunk of their salaries into safe ETFs like the ones that track the S&P 500. Today, I'm going to talk about what I think is the middle ground that will not only set you up for a pretty nice and early retirement, but also allow you to live versions of your rich life in the meantime. I think it's not good to spend everything you make, but I also think it's not good to save everything you make either. Stick around to the end of the video where I crunch the actual numbers of how much you can expect to live off of and ultimately point you to how I constructed my investment portfolio. So why do we spend? Let me shed some light on my early spending story to give you some context. So back when I was attending MIT, my YouTube channel was doing pretty well. I started the channel between my freshman and sophomore years, and by the time I was a junior and senior, I was bringing in consistent ad revenue and bringing in consistent sponsorship money to the point where I was able to go ahead and purchase a Tesla Model 3 my senior year. So that was a car that I was able to drive around on campus in Boston. In hindsight, something that I definitely did not need. Boston is a fairly small city. Even at this point in time right now, I do not have a car. And although I was able to afford the monthly payment of the car, those payments could have definitely gone to better uses like investments or just paying off student loans, which I do have a small amount, like not too crazy, but it still would have been good. And I just wanted to push that off as far as possible, and luckily right now like those interest rates are very low compared to what is happening right now, so I still don't have the biggest pressure to pay them off, but something that shouldn't have even been a thing at this point. Fast forward to just the end of 2020, which was the year that I graduated and the year that I started at Stanford, because again of how well the YouTube channel was doing and because I was doing well at the startup that I was working at, I was bringing in so much revenue that I felt invincible. I ended up having not only my Stanford dorm, but also another 2-bedroom apartment in Palo Alto that I was paying for in order to have a studio office space that I can continue to work out of. Yes, it was a tax write-off, and yes, these were business expenses so that I can push some of my ventures forward, but it put a lot of strain on me, like in hindsight, because of the opportunity cost of not putting that money elsewhere. And of course, at the time, I really decked out my apartment and made sure I had really nice furniture that would last a long time. I even constructed a home gym that I can work out of because there were no gyms that I can go to, and I didn't know when things would come back to normal. And there were just a lot of more extravagant things that I did at that time that in hindsight, again, the opportunity cost was really there for investing. And then fast forwarding just one more year later, when I got sick and contracted my 2 autoimmune diseases, my feeling of invincibility definitely faded away real quick. At that point, I was a contractor for 2 different startups and I was making YouTube videos. So from the intro of the video, at this point, I was making probably close to $250,000 total. And at this point though, I'm an hourly contractor, so I'm sick. I'm unable to log any hours. I don't have any health insurance coming in from being a W-2 employee. And at the same time, my body was going through these drastic changes and I didn't even feel comfortable coming on camera to speak. So if you have been following this channel for a long time, it was during this period of time where I just felt so uncomfortable posting. And when I did, my face looked a lot bigger, I was a lot puffier, and I just felt kind of embarrassed. And it was at this time where I started to realize how much of an impact I could have, not only on myself, but also my loved ones and the community around me. And just diving a little bit into the psychology of money, we spend money for the joy and gratification that we think we're going to feel once we have said item or experience said thing. With the unprecedented takeover of social media, we've become a society that more often than not will prefer instant gratification now over stability and happiness in the future. We see this in the fact that according to CNBC, 60% of Americans have less than $500 in their savings, and 80% of Americans have less than $5,000 in their savings accounts. Of course, there are other factors in play, like skyrocketing costs of living, but the fact of the matter is most people will still choose to rent a place that's above their means or buy a car that they can't afford over investing money in the stock market. So why doesn't everyone just invest? Anyone can look and see that the S&P 500 has almost tripled over the last 10 years. People have heard things like an annual 10% return and compounded interest, but I don't think people understand the importance of this because they never actually sit and look at the numbers. People always feel like they don't have enough money or will start investing when they reach a certain salary. Trust me, I've been there. But let's look over at a good old compounding interest calculator to see how far consistent investing can take you. So right now I have a compound interest calculator pulled up, and this is a simple one. If you Google compound interest calculator, it's the first one that comes up. And if you want the URL, here that is. So right now, I'm just looking over how much just $500 invested every month could compound in 30 years, for example. I'm 25, 30 years, that'd be 55. So just having initial investment of 500 and contributing just 500 additionally, and over the span of 30 years, we should be able to expect somewhere between 8 and 12%. If we want to be more conservative and account for inflation along the way, we'd probably go with the 8% route. But I'll do the 10% and put a variance of 2 so that we can see the lower and upper bounds of what that 8 versus 12% will look like, and then the middle ground of 10%. So I'll leave it at compounding annually, and we'll see where we go. So as you can see, in 30 years, just that $500 a month has a range. It has a range from this turquoise line is the 8%. Increase. So that's the increase that is very conservative, takes into account inflation year over year, and you'll have around $690,000 in 30 years. The 10% point is pretty much $1 million at this point. We're like 4,000 short, and it'll be 995,688. And if the stock market does really well over the next 30 years and say returns you 12%, we're talking close to $1.5 million in 30 years. And this is why I think people don't fully look into the numbers, because if they did, they'd see that it doesn't take that much money to become a millionaire by the time you retire. And I feel like a lot of people have this thought that $1 million is really, really difficult to achieve in your lifetime. But I just showed from this compounding interest calculator that you can get there with relatively small investments over time. And let's just, for the sake of looking, see what happens when we just change that $500 a month to $1,000 a month. So if I go ahead and make the initial investment 1,000, and then we go to the monthly contribution and make that 1,000 also, keep everything else the same so we can see just the difference, we can calculate and see that now we're at the point where it's close to 2 million a year. Where the lower bound is close to 1.4 million and the upper bound being at around 3 million. So you can see how quickly things can increase. And personally, the reason why I'd want to invest and the reasons why I think other people will invest is for retirement, is for giving back to their families, to have nice things later, and just in general to not stress money in the future. I think we all want stability in our lives, and we all want that comfort that money brings. But at the same time, we have to understand the magnitude of money that we're dealing with. And because of how good investment is, should we invest as much as humanly possible? I think the answer to that is no. Ramit Sethi likes to use the phrase rich life a lot, and I think it's a perfect phrase for describing the life you hope to live now and in the future. Regardless of your income, your rich life is the life in which you spend guilt-free on the areas of life that bring you joy and spend more frugally on the areas of your life that you don't care about as much. And for me, I want to focus on the fact that you can live your rich life now and still have an even richer life in the future. My current rich life is that I want to be able to travel during any month of the year that I want to. I want to spend as much time as I can with my loved ones. I want to play basketball as often as I'd like, and I want to grow my businesses as well. So for this, I make sure that I budget out somewhere around $1,500 a month for guilt-free spending and have fixed costs for things like regular cleaning services and meal deliveries and accounting services to ensure that my time is only spent doing the things that I truly enjoy myself. My future rich life has a couple of big factors. I want to have a very nice wedding. I want to be able to book Michelle and I up for the Four Seasons Jet World Tour someday. I want to be able to help retire both my parents and Michelle's parents comfortably and close by. And I hope to have one nicer sports car and one nicer SUV. With my income streams and with my investing strategies, I'm able to have my rich life now without jeopardizing my future rich life. In order to do so, I do not eat out very often, and there are actually very little purchases that I do that aren't related to the businesses that I'm running. I don't buy fancy clothes, and I pretty much wear the same shoes every day. When you're coming up with your rich life, it's good to actually crunch the numbers to see what everything will cost. That way you know what you need to target in the future. For the vast majority of my viewers, my rich life won't align with yours. Most will elect for a more simple life, and that's okay, because your rich life is your rich life, not mine. Okay, so now we'll get to the question of how much you should be investing in the meantime. Fundamentally, you should be investing however much it'll take to support the rich life you hope to live now and into the future. If in the future you don't imagine buying multiple houses or having a collection of cars or paying for each kid's full tuition, there's only so much money that you actually need to live the life that you want and deserve. I brought up the compounding interest calculator because once engineers start investing very aggressively, their portfolios can balloon quite fast. At this point, investing can quickly become a game where they hope to have as big of a number in their portfolios as humanly possible. Most of the time not fully understanding that this would lead to many more millions of dollars down the line than anticipated. If your goal is to retire in your 30s, or if your goal is to provide generational wealth to your family, sure, invest as much as you possibly can in the meantime. But I think for the vast majority of individuals, investing, say 10 to 20% of your gross income is way more than sufficient. Let's take a look at the average software developer salary here in the US, which according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics is $132,930 a year. 20% of that invested yearly is $26,586 per year. Compounding this conservatively into the S&P 500 at just 8%, which again, remember that's the lower bound of the chart that we were looking at before. In 40 years, that means you'll have $7 million by the time that you retire. If we look at just 10% invested per month for 40 years, this leads to about $3.6 million invested in 40 years. Again, this is the lower bound of everything. At this time, you may have a house and cars that are already paid off, kids that have already gone through college and are working. So what will you do with all of that money? Say you get your first software engineering job at 22, work until you're 62, and die at 102 years old, which is far beyond the average life expectancy. You'd still be giving yourself between $90,000 and $175,000 a year to live off of during a time in your life that you most likely have less fixed expenses. Remember, this is just investing 10 to 20% of your gross income. So beyond these investment numbers, we get into very exuberant territory, a territory that most software engineers would probably tell you that they don't ever want to get into. They always tell me things like they'll just enjoy having a simple life and not worrying about money. If that's truly your answer, then investing 10% a year to get to $3.6 million at retirement will more than set you up for that life. All of this to say that there isn't a right or wrong answer with how much money you should invest, because each individual has a different definition of their current and future rich life, and each individual has a different retirement plan. But I just want you to understand that there's pathways to live your rich life right now and an even richer life in the future. If you want to see how I personally constructed my investment portfolio, check out this video right here. As always, stay positive, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.